There's been a remarkable show of strength from two families today after an unimaginable tragedy killed 4 young children at Oatlands in Sydney's northwest.
There were 7 children involved. 4 children have been confirmed deceased.
Have you 100% forgiven Samuel for killing the children?
It would be the greatest story ever told. I'd write it about my daddy, for he had a heart of gold.
The public version of this story is simple. A drunk and drug-affected driver, a group of kids, a disaster that didn't have to happen. Police confirmed 7 children were involved and 4 died.
There were 7 children involved. 4 children have been confirmed deceased.
And if you're thinking, okay, so he was a career criminal, right? That's what a lot of people assumed. But here's the first twist. Samuel Davidson had no criminal history, no record that screamed future headline. He had a job. He'd worked as a truck driver. He was described by people who knew him as quiet, even reliable. And that contrast matters because it's how these stories really happen. Not always with monsters, sometimes with ordinary people. And one catastrophic pattern. A pattern Samuel himself admitted. Binge drinking, weekend after weekend. Getting obliterated. Not a glass of wine, not a couple beers, more like erase the night drunk. On the day it happened, he said he'd had a big night, woke up early, and started drinking again. His memory of the lead-up is blurry, pieces missing, and then comes that sickening question.
One mother has offered forgiveness to the man accused of being drunk behind the wheel, while the parents of Samuel Davidson, the man facing charges over the crash.
Why were they driving at all? Even Samuel couldn't fully explain it. He remembers impatience at a light. He remembers running a red. He remembers taking a corner so fast, he later described it as impossible to recover from. And then everything changes. The crash scene was described as carnage, the kind of image that doesn't leave your body, the kind of memory that sticks to your life like smoke. Samuel was taken back to a police station for breath testing. His reading, 0.150. And if you're not familiar with what that means, here's the brutal reality. At that level, many people have severely impaired coordination, judgment, reaction time, exactly the things you need most when you're controlling a vehicle. A car becomes a weapon, even when you didn't intend it to be. And now, the tragedy has names. Anthony, Angelina, Sienna, Veronique, 4 children gone.
There's been a remarkable show of strength from two families today after an unimaginable tragedy killed 4 young children at Oatlands in Sydney's northwest.
True crime usually wants a villain you can hate, but this case complicates that. Samuel wasn't presented as a mastermind. He was presented as a mess, a shirtless, disheveled image in the media, the kind of photo that turns a person into a symbol. The symbol was reckless youth, partying, no discipline. But people who knew him earlier painted a different picture. A teacher described him as personable, someone who listened, someone who could be respectful. And then you hear Samuel talk about childhood, and it's painfully normal. Football, family, plans. He even said he once wanted to join the army. So what happened? This is where the story folds inward. Samuel lost his older sister, unexpectedly. She'd lived with severe illness, had a lung transplant, and then an infection took her life. He was 19 when he got the call, and he says he tried to be brave. But grief doesn't care how tough you try to act. And for him, grief became fuel, not for growth, for escape. He said the drinking escalated after that loss. He hid behind alcohol, sometimes drugs, but he repeatedly described alcohol as the main problem. Here's a curiosity that matters, because it explains why binge drinking is so dangerous. When people binge drink regularly, they can build a tolerance that makes them feel less impaired than they really are. So they can look fine, talk fine, even walk fine, and still have reaction time and judgment that are absolutely wrecked. That illusion is how people end up saying, "I didn't think I was that drunk," and then a family buries children. Now we meet Danny Abdullah. Danny had 3 of the children who died.
There were 7 children involved. 4 children have been confirmed deceased.
And if you've never heard a parent describe grief like this, it changes you. Danny talks about birthdays, how most parents anticipate 1 date a year, but he has 3. And he says something that's almost impossible to hear without going quiet.
Yeah, the temptation's there, but I don't want that to be me, my identity, where I live just in that place and think about it and rewrite the story in my head and try and work out what I can do It'll just eat me alive.
And there's another detail people miss. When the crash happened, Danny says he didn't chase Samuel, not because he didn't feel rage. He did.
Did you consider that Samuel might be watching it, that he would hear that message of forgiveness?
No, not one bit. I didn't think of Samuel. I didn't even think about the impact it would have had at the time. I just was so laser focused on my wife and my kids, and that's all I worried about.
But because his kids were in front of him, dead or alive, he didn't know. And in that moment, his body chose one job: don't leave the children.
Have you 100% forgiven Samuel for killing the children?
100% I have.
Completely?
Completely.
There's not 1% of anger?
There's probably disappointment, but I can't sit in that past place and dwell. I've accepted what's happened.
Were you angry?
Of course I was angry. Yeah.
That's the kind of moment you can't judge from the outside. People say, if that were me, I'd kill him. And then it happens, and the body does something else entirely. Danny stayed because a parent stays. Days after the tragedy, Danny's wife, Leila Abdullah, went on national television and said she forgave Samuel. That sentence ripped through the country like lightning. Some people called it beautiful. Some called it impossible. Some called it offensive. And inside custody, an officer told Samuel. Samuel said he cried because forgiveness, when you don't deserve it, feels like being handed oxygen underwater. But let's be honest, forgiveness doesn't mean it's fine. It doesn't mean no consequences. It doesn't mean we're even. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. Forgiveness is a decision not to carry poison in your own bloodstream forever. Danny later explained it in a way that's so simple it hurts. He didn't want to dig a deeper hole. He didn't want pain to become a second disaster. And then he says the line that most people will argue about for hours. He believes justice isn't really for victims. It's for the community, because no sentence gives him what he wants most: his children back.
When they said the sentencing, it didn't shake me at all, because it wasn't going to get, if it was going to get my kids back, I would have been overly concerned, but it's not going to get my kids back.
Years pass. Samuel is now in a maximum security prison, a controlled life, locked in his cell for long stretches, the kind of time that forces you to sit with yourself. He's housed, numbered, scheduled. Even showers are timed. Even doors require permission. And Samuel says he has dreams, not about freedom in some poetic way, but about something stupidly normal, opening a door without waiting. That's how prison rewires the brain. It doesn't only punish you with bars, it punishes you by making basic autonomy feel like fantasy. Then we get to the moment that shouldn't exist. A program called Restorative Justice makes a meeting possible. Danny Abdullah meets Samuel Davidson, not as a headline, not as monster versus victim, but as two men in the same story. And when they sit together, Danny says something that reframes everything.
Yeah, it was a moment where I saw a person that's probably living with the pain of killing 4 children and giving 1 child brain damage. You know, putting my parent hat aside, I could see that he's living in a place of guilt. And you know, I always say, if I had to give him a gun and say, you either shoot those kids or shoot yourself, he'd probably say, I'll shoot myself instead. So what do I do with that? Do I just keep hurting him? It's not going to make anything. Do I keep hating him? What's it going to do? It's not going to do anything.
Danny isn't excusing him. He's describing the shape of remorse. And Samuel does what he has to do in that room. He apologizes, not once, not casually. He apologizes broadly to the family, to responders, to everyone impacted.
Have you apologized?
I have, and I'll do it again. Danny, I'm really sorry to you and your whole family for what I've done, and all your friends. And I'm also sorry to all the emergency services that turned up to that day and had to deal with what they dealt with. And I'm sorry to everyone, even the neighbours that were on the scene. Everyone that I've affected, I apologise. And I'm deeply sorry, and I regret it for the rest of my life.
And Danny answers simply,
Yeah, I've forgiven you already.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
because if you're watching this, part of your brain is probably yelling, how? And that's the point. Restorative justice isn't about erasing punishment. It's about confronting consequence. It's about the offender meeting the human wreckage of what they did and the victim reclaiming their own story. Then comes the question that made even the reporter pause. Does Samuel deserve to be in prison as long as he is? Danny, father of 3 of the dead children, says something that sounds impossible.
That's a good question. Look, if it was up to me, I'd bring him out tomorrow. I know the guy.
Really?
Justice is to have my kids back. That's all. If you got 1 day or you got 100 years, it's not gonna change how I feel.
Not because he thinks Samuel got away with it, but because Danny knows something most of us don't learn until pain teaches it. Keeping someone locked up doesn't reverse time. The only justice that would satisfy his heart is the one thing no court can deliver. And Samuel, he doesn't claim he deserves mercy. He says he accepts punishment. He says he's at fault. And he says the sentence is the card he's been dealt. This story isn't here to make you comfortable. It's here to make you aware. Because the line between a normal weekend and a permanent nightmare can be one car ride. Samuel's final message is simple, and it's the kind of advice that sounds obvious until it's too late.
All right. So if there's anything I can say to anyone, it is, obey the speed limit, obey all the traffic laws. Please do not drink and drive or under the influence of anything before you drive. Do not do it. And don't drink or take drugs or anything to hide your depression or any anxieties. Just go see a professional if you have to. And some of you might think I'm crazy, but go to church, give it a go, try it. You never know. So yeah, that's my biggest message.
And Danny's message is harder.
Be a person of good habits, sober habits, and don't get too chronically drunk and take drugs. There's no happy ending on that. There's no positive at the end of it.
4 children are still gone. Nothing fixes that. But somehow, through faith, grief, and a decision most of us can't imagine, this family refused to let hatred become a second funeral. And maybe that's the real true crime twist. Not the crash, not the sentence, but the forgiveness that turned the most impossible meeting into something that looked, briefly, like peace. Because in the end, you don't just risk your own future, you risk becoming the reason someone else has to learn how to survive without theirs.
It would be the greatest story ever told. I'd write it about my daddy, for he had a heart of gold.